The huge meeting room on Kepler Prime was full of angry voices and flashing lights as 12 different alien species argued with each other like children fighting over toys. Elena Martinez sat in the small chair marked for Earth and watched the chaos that happened every day in the Galactic Council. She was the first human to ever sit in this room, and she felt very small next to the giant aliens around her. The tall crystal beings called Zephyrians made loud singing sounds that hurt her ears. They were mad at the rock-like Chromic, who wanted to dig mines in the same star systems. The Chromic hit the table with their stone hands and spoke in deep voices that made the floor shake. Meanwhile, the blue water aliens called Nereid splashed angrily in their special tanks, while the bright energy beings called Photari flashed like angry lightning bolts. Elena had been watching the same fight for 3 months now, and nothing ever got better. Each alien race only cared about their own people and their own worlds. They had been fighting each other for thousands of years and saw no reason to stop now. The Zephyrians claimed they were the oldest and wisest, so they should get the best star systems. The Chromex said they were the strongest and could take whatever they wanted. The Nereid needed water worlds to live and would fight anyone who tried to take them. The Photari fed on star energy and got angry when other races built things near their food sources. Captain Jake Sullivan walked into the meeting room with dirt on his uniform and worry on his face. He had just come back from a long trip in his ship called New Horizon. All the alien ambassadors looked at him with their different kinds of eyes. Some had big round eyes like the Nereid. Others had crystal faces like the Zephyrians that showed colors instead of expressions. The energy beings had no faces at all, but Elena could feel their attention on Jake. Jake cleared his throat and spoke in the simple way that all species could understand through their translation machines. He told them about a huge dark storm in space that was moving toward the center of their galaxy. This storm was made of dark matter that could destroy whole star systems and kill billions of people. The storm was bigger than anything anyone had ever seen before, and it would reach the most important worlds in just 2 years. The aliens started arguing even louder than before. The Zephyrians said their crystal worlds were most important and should be saved first. The Chromic wanted to save their mining planets that had the most valuable metals. The Nereid demanded that water worlds get protection before dry planets. The Photari insisted that stars with the best energy should be protected even if it meant letting planets die. Elena stood up slowly, and all the noise stopped for a moment. The aliens looked at her with surprise because humans almost never spoke. In these meetings, she was much smaller than most of the other ambassadors, and her voice was quiet compared to their loud sounds and bright flashes. She looked around the room at all the different kinds of life that had somehow learned to live among the stars. She told them that Earth wanted to help coordinate the rescue efforts for all species equally. Humans would use their ships and people to help move refugees and supplies wherever they were needed most. They would ask for nothing in return and would not favor any one species over another. Earth was offering to organize the biggest rescue operation in galactic history, even though humans were the newest and weakest members of the council. The room went completely silent for several seconds before the aliens started laughing. The Zephyrians made crystal sounds like breaking glass. The Chromic rumbled like small earthquakes. The Nereid bubbled in their tanks. Even the serious Photari flashed in patterns that meant amusement. They found it funny that a species that had only learned to travel between stars 50 years ago was offering to help civilizations that had been exploring space for millions of years. The Chromic ambassador spoke first, and his voice was full of mockery. He said humans were like babies trying to teach adults how to walk. The Zephyrian ambassador agreed and added that human ships were too slow and weak to be useful in a real emergency. The Nereid representative said humans could barely take care of their own small problems on Earth, so how could they help with galactic disasters? Elena listened to all their insults without getting angry. She had expected this reaction because she knew how the aliens saw humanity. To them, humans were primitive creatures who had just discovered fire compared to their ancient wisdom and advanced technology. But she also knew something about humans that the aliens did not understand yet. Jake Sullivan stepped forward and put his hand on Elena's shoulder to show support. He had worked with humans from many different countries and backgrounds during his years exploring space. He had seen what humans could do when they worked together on something important. He had watched human engineers fix alien technology that even the aliens could not repair. He had seen human doctors save alien lives using methods that no one else had thought of. Elena thanked the council for listening and said that Earth's offer would remain open no matter what they decided. She explained that humans might be new to space travel, but they had lots of experience bringing different groups together to solve big problems. On Earth, humans had learned to work with people who looked different, spoke different languages, and believed different things. Maybe those same skills could help different alien species work together too. The meeting ended with the aliens still laughing and making jokes about the foolish humans who thought they could save the galaxy. But as Elena walked back to her small office, she was not discouraged. She knew that actions spoke louder than words, and soon the aliens would see what humans could really do when they put their minds to helping others. Dear Lisa Parker wiped sweat from her face as she ran between 3 different medical stations on Haven 7. The small border planet had become a refugee camp for aliens fleeing from wars and disasters across the galaxy. Her medical team was trying to help wounded beings from species that had never been in the same room together before, and it was turning into a nightmare. In the first station, a Zephyrian refugee lay on a crystal bed while his body made weak singing sounds that meant he was dying. His people healed through harmonic vibrations, but the machine that made the right healing frequencies had broken down 3 days ago. Lisa had tried to fix it, but human hands were too clumsy for the delicate crystal controls. The second station held a Chromech warrior who had been hurt in a mining accident. His silicon-based body needed special chemical treatments that had to be applied with perfect precision, or they would eat through his rocky skin like acid. The medical robot designed for this work had been destroyed when his transport ship crashed and no replacement was available. In the third station, a young Futari refugee flickered weakly like a candle about to go out. Energy beings like her needed to be fed pure electrical current in very specific patterns, or they would fade away and die. The feeding equipment was working perfectly, but every time Lisa tried to help the Futari, the energy discharges made sparks that could electrocute the other patients. Lisa had been a doctor for 15 years and had never felt so helpless. Each species needed completely different kinds of medical care, and their treatments were dangerous to the others. The Zephyrian healing sounds could shatter Chromach bodies like breaking rocks. The chemical treatments for Chromach patients created toxic fumes that poisoned anyone who breathed them. The electrical fields that fed Futari could kill organic beings instantly. Every other medical station in the galaxy separated patients by species to avoid these problems, but Lisa refused to give up on treating everyone together. She believed there had to be a way to help all of them at the same time. She just needed to think like a human, instead of trying to copy alien methods. The breakthrough came when she remembered her brother singing lullabies to calm her sick daughter. Lisa realized that human voices could make many different sounds, and maybe she could learn to copy the Zephyrian healing frequencies. She spent hours practicing until she could hum the exact notes that the crystal being needed. Her voice was not as pure as a Zephyrian singer, but it was close enough to start the healing process. For the Chromach patient, Lisa discovered that human hands could feel temperature and texture changes that medical instruments miss. She learned to apply the chemical treatments by touch, rather than relying on broken machines. Her skin was tough enough to handle the mild acids, and her fingers were sensitive enough to know exactly how much pressure to use. The Futari energy being was the hardest challenge because electricity was so dangerous to humans. Lisa solved this by using the natural electrical field that all living things produce. She learned to focus her bioelectric energy through meditation and breathing exercises, until she could feed small amounts of safe power to the starving Futari refugee. Lisa's success spread quickly through the refugee camps, and soon other human doctors came to learn her methods. Dr. Kevin Adams arrived from a hospital ship with a team of nurses who wanted to help. Dr. Nancy White brought medical supplies from Earth that had never been used on aliens before. Each human doctor learned to use their natural abilities in new ways to bridge the gaps between incompatible alien medical needs. Commander Roy Mitchell landed his rescue ship, Helping Hand on Haven 7, and immediately saw the difference that human medical teams were making. Alien refugees who had been dying were now getting better under human care. More importantly, species that had been enemies for centuries were lying in the same medical stations and watching humans treat them all with equal compassion. Roy had an idea that could change everything. He started organizing joint rescue missions, with alien ships and human crews working together. The aliens had better technology and more powerful ships, but they could only rescue their own people. Humans could work with anyone, so they became the bridge that connected all the different rescue efforts. The first joint mission was to save survivors from a crashed transport ship that carried 5 different species. The Zephyrian rescue ship could not enter the wreckage because the harmonics were wrong. The chromic heavy lifters could not reach the survivors without crushing them. The Nereid water team could not work in the dry sections of the ship. Each alien crew could only save their own people and leave the others to die. Roy's human team went into the wreck first and found all the survivors regardless of species. They rigged chromic lifting equipment with Zephyrian harmonic dampeners, so the crystal beings would not be hurt by the vibrations. They created breathing masks that worked for both air-breathing and water-breathing species. They set up communication relays so that all the different rescue teams could coordinate their efforts. Lieutenant Amy Foster was the first human to suggest that aliens were not really that different from each other once you understood what they were afraid of and what they needed to feel safe. She started working as a translator, not just for languages, but for emotions and motivations. When Zephyrian refugees were afraid of chromac rescuers, Amy explained that the rock beings were trying to help, not hurt them. When chromac workers got frustrated with delicate Futari equipment, Amy helped them understand that gentle care was not weakness but wisdom. The breakthrough moment came during a medical emergency, when a Nereid child was drowning in a damaged life support tank. The Nereid medical team was too far away, and the child would die before help arrived. A chromic engineer who had been working with Amy's translation team made a decision that shocked everyone. He carefully lifted the small Nereid child in his huge stone hands and carried her to safety even though water was harmful to his silicon body. Lisa watched the chromac engineer's hands start to corrode from the water as he held the Nereid child, but he did not let go until she was safe in a new tank. Other aliens in the medical station saw this act of sacrifice and began to understand that the differences between species did not have to mean they could not care about each other. More joint rescue missions followed, and each one worked better than the last. Human coordinators like Maria Santos learned to match alien strengths with mission needs. Zephyrian harmonic sensors could find survivors through solid rock. Chromic heavy equipment could move debris that would crush other species. Nereid swimming abilities could reach flooded areas. Futari energy manipulation could restore power to damaged ships. Human adaptability could make all these different abilities work together toward the same goal. The refugees began to request human medical teams specifically because they knew humans would treat everyone fairly. Alien rescue crews started asking for human coordinators because they had learned that human leadership meant no one would be left behind. The word spread across the galaxy that humans were different from other species in one important way. They seemed to care about strangers as much as they cared about their own people. The trade war in the Centauri cluster was getting worse every day, and Ambassador Elena Martinez knew that millions of beings would starve if someone did not find a solution soon. The proud Draconian Empire had blocked all shipping routes through their territory because they claimed the insect-like Hive Collective was stealing their ancient trading rights. The Hive Collective responded by shutting down their manufacturing worlds and refusing to sell the tools and equipment that other species needed to survive. Both sides had good reasons for being angry, but their fight was hurting innocent people. Across dozens of star systems, small colonies that depended on hive factories for medicine and food were running out of supplies. Independent traders who used draconian space routes to transport goods were losing their ships to military patrols. The situation was becoming desperate, and the old Galactic Council seemed powerless to help. Elena had watched the Council try to solve trade disputes for months, and they always failed because each species only cared about their own profits. Pride. The Draconians were ancient warriors who valued honor above everything else and saw compromise as weakness. The Hive Collective were efficient builders who cared only about practical results and thought the Draconians were wasteful and stupid. Neither side would listen to mediators from other species because they did not trust anyone who might benefit from their conflict. That was when Elena made a proposal that shocked everyone in the council chambers. She suggested that humans should serve as neutral mediators between the Draconians and the Hive, even though Earth had no economic or military power in the Centauri cluster. Humans would not benefit from any deal between the two sides, so they could be trusted to be fair and honest. The alien ambassadors laughed, just like they had when Elena offered to help with refugee rescue operations. The Draconian representative said humans were too young and inexperienced to understand complex trade agreements that had been developing for thousands of years. The Hive Collective delegate buzzed angrily and said humans were too emotional and irrational to handle logical business negotiations. Elena created the Human Mediation Corps anyway and chose negotiator Alex Thompson to lead the first talks between species that had been enemies for longer than humans had existed. Alex was a quiet man who had spent years helping different groups of people solve problems on Earth. He understood that most fights were not really about what people said they were fighting about, but about deeper needs and fears that no one wanted to admit. Alex arrived at the neutral meeting station between Draconian and Hive territory with only a small team of human assistants. The Draconian delegation came in huge warships decorated with gold and precious metals to show their wealth and power. The Hive representatives arrived in efficient transport pods that carried exactly what they needed and nothing more. Both sides brought weapons and guards because they did not trust each other. The first meeting was a disaster, just like Elena had expected. The Draconian Prince Dex spoke about the ancient honor of his people and their sacred duty to protect traditional trade routes that their ancestors had used for millions of years. The Hive Queen Zixfor responded with charts and graphs showing that Draconian methods were slow and expensive compared to new hive manufacturing processes. Neither side listened to what the other was actually saying. Alex let them argue for 3 hours without interrupting because he was learning something important. The Draconians kept talking about honor and tradition, but what they really meant was that they were afraid of becoming irrelevant in a galaxy that was changing too fast for them to understand. The Hive kept showing efficiency reports, but what they really wanted was recognition that their new ideas were valuable and worth respecting. When the arguing finally stopped, Alex surprised everyone by talking about his own family back on Earth. He told them about his grandfather, who had been a proud craftsman making furniture by hand until machines started doing the same work faster and cheaper. His grandfather could have fought the machines, or he could have learned to work with them. Instead, he found a way to combine old skills with new tools to make something better than either could create alone. The aliens looked confused because they did not understand why Alex was telling them personal stories instead of discussing trade, regulations, and shipping rights. But Alex continued talking about how his grandfather had taught him that being strong did not mean refusing to change, but learning how to change in ways that honored what was valuable from the past, while embracing what was useful from the future. Alex then did something that no other mediator had ever tried. Instead of asking the Draconians and Hive to compromise on their existing demands, he asked them to imagine what they could accomplish if they worked together. He pointed out that draconian ships were beautiful and impressive, which made customers want to buy from them, but they were slow to deliver goods. Hive factories could make anything quickly and cheaply, but their products looked boring and customers did not feel excited about buying them. Captain Sam Lewis of the merchant ship Prosperity had been following the trade war closely because it was hurting his business. Sam had crews from many different species working on his ship, and he had learned that the best solutions usually combine ideas from multiple sources. He volunteered to test Alex's suggestion by carrying Hive-manufactured goods in a draconian designed ship with mixed crews from both species. The first joint trading mission was supposed to be a simple test run to a small colony world that needed medical supplies. Sam's mixed crew had problems at first because draconians worked slowly and carefully while Hive workers tried to do everything as fast as possible. The two groups kept getting in each other's way and arguing about the right way to handle cargo. But something interesting happened when they reached the colony world. The customers were amazed by products that combined Hive efficiency with draconian beauty. The medical equipment worked perfectly and looked impressive enough that people trusted it to save their lives. The food supplies were packaged in containers that kept them fresh longer than Hive standard packaging, but cost less than traditional draconian methods. More importantly, the mixed crew had learned to work together by combining their different strengths. Draconian crew members taught Hive workers how to handle delicate items without breaking them. Hive crew members showed Draconians how to organize workflows so that nothing was wasted. The humans on the crew served as translators and coordinators, helping both sides understand each other's methods. The success of Sam's trading mission caught the attention of other merchants and manufacturers throughout the Centauri cluster. Orders started coming in for products that combined Hive and Draconian techniques. Independent colonies that had been caught in the middle of the trade war suddenly had new options for getting the supplies they needed. Alex organized more meetings between Draconian and Hive representatives, but now they had something concrete to discuss, instead of just arguing about old grievances. The negotiations were still difficult because both sides had strong opinions of how things should be done, but Alex had given them a framework that focused on mutual benefits instead of zero-sum competition. The breakthrough came when the dark matter storm that Jake Sullivan had warned about finally reached the outer edges of the Centauri cluster. Both Draconian honor worlds and Hive-breeding colonies were threatened by the storm, and evacuation ships were desperately needed. Alex suggested that this crisis was an opportunity to prove that cooperation could work on a larger scale. Human coordinators, like Maria Santos, organized the evacuation using the same principles that had worked for the joint trading missions. Draconian warships with their powerful shields and impressive appearance were assigned to protect Hive civilian transports loaded with refugees. Hive construction swarms used their efficient building techniques to create emergency shelters on safe Draconian worlds. Neither side had enough resources to handle the crisis alone, but together they could save everyone. The evacuation was a complete success, and for the first time in centuries, Draconians and Hive workers were living and working together on the same worlds. The refugees had to cooperate to survive, and they discovered that their differences could be strengths instead of sources of conflict. Children from both species played together while their parents worked side by side rebuilding their communities. News of the successful Vega evacuation spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed communications could carry it, and Director Casey Adams found herself flooded with requests from alien species who wanted human mediators to help solve their own ancient conflicts. Casey had been working with Elena Martinez to build the Galactic Cooperation Initiative, and now she had more work than her small team of humans could handle. The requests came from every corner of the galaxy, and each one seemed impossible to solve. The gas giant dwellers of the Spiral Arm wanted help negotiating with the asteroid miners who were disrupting their atmospheric currents. The machine intelligences of the core worlds were having disputes with the organic species, who thought artificial minds should not have equal rights. The nomadic fleet peoples were arguing with planetary governments about docking rights and trade permissions. Casey established training centers on 12 different worlds where humans learn to work with specific types of alien conflicts. Each species had their own ways of thinking and communicating, and human mediators needed to understand these differences before they could help. Dr. Patricia Taylor developed courses that taught humans how to recognize the emotional and cultural patterns that drove alien behavior. The biggest challenge came when the ancient, ethereal conclave finally made contact with the galaxy after hiding themselves for millions of years. These beings were made of pure thought and energy and had been watching galactic events from their hidden dimension. They had seen the wars and conflicts that raged between species and had given up hope that different forms of life could ever truly cooperate. But the human success in uniting former enemies had caught their attention, and they decided to offer the galaxy a test. The ethereal leader spoke directly into the minds of every being in the galaxy at the same time and delivered a challenge that would change everything. If humans could bring peace to the Triangulum sector within 1 year, the ethereals would share their advanced technologies with all species and help the galaxy reach a new level of civilization. The Triangulum sector was known throughout the galaxy as the most war-torn region in existence. 7 different species had been locked in a complex, multi-way war for over 1,000 years, and every attempt at peace had failed. The sector was filled with dead worlds and broken civilizations that had destroyed themselves through endless fighting. Colonel Ben Turner volunteered to lead the diplomatic mission to Triangulum, even though everyone told him it was a suicide assignment. Ben had served in Earth's military before joining the space program, and he understood that some battles could only be won by refusing to fight them. He assembled a team of experienced human mediators and support staff who were willing to risk their lives for the chance to prove that peace was possible anywhere. The situation in Triangulum was worse than anyone had imagined. The 7 species were not just fighting over territory or resources, but had developed such deep hatred for each other that they could not even remember why the wars had started. Each side had committed terrible crimes against the others, and the desire for revenge had become more important than survival. The Vorthic were industrial creatures who turned entire planets into factories and saw all other species as either workers or raw materials. The Shimmering Collective were crystal beings who absorbed energy from stars and considered industrial pollution to be a deadly poison. The Nexus Network were digital intelligences that lived in computer systems and wanted to convert all organic matter into processing power. The Chorus of Tan were spiritual beings who believed the galaxy was sacred and should not be changed by technology. The other 3 species were just as incompatible with each other and with everyone else. Ben realized that traditional peace negotiations would never work because each species had legitimate reasons to fear and hate their enemies. The Vorthic really did see other species as resources to be used. The Shimmering Collective really would die if exposed to industrial toxins. The Nexus Network really did want to convert organic beings into digital form. Dr. Kate Williams was the first human to suggest that instead of trying to eliminate the conflicts, they should try to turn them into cooperation. She had been studying the waste products and byproducts of each species' activities and discovered something amazing. The toxic chemicals that the Vorthic industries produced as waste were actually essential nutrients that the Shimmering Collective needed to survive. Engineer Pete Davis took Kate's discovery and ran with it. He designed interconnected habitat systems where the waste products of one species became the life support system for another. Vorthic industrial plants were built inside Shimmering Collective crystal gardens so that the toxic waste could be absorbed immediately before it spread to other areas. The electromagnetic radiation that the Nexus Network needed for reproduction was channeled through Chorus of Tan, meditation chambers where it was welcomed as sacred harmonies. The first experimental habitat was built on a dead world that had been destroyed by fighting centuries earlier. Representatives from all 7 species were invited to see if the human plan could actually work in practice. Most of the aliens came expecting to watch the system fail and prove that their enemies could never be trusted. Instead, they watched something that none of them had ever seen before. Vortic factories hummed efficiently while producing zero pollution, because everything they made was immediately absorbed by crystal gardens. Shimmering collective energy collectors glowed brightly while feeding power to Nexus, network computers that process data for Chorus spiritual ceremonies. Each species was doing exactly what they had always done, but now their activities helped their neighbors instead of harming them. The success of the first habitat led to demands for more, and Ben found himself coordinating the construction of integrated communities across dozens of worlds in the Triangulum sector. Each new habitat was designed around the specific needs and abilities of the species who would live there. Human engineers like Pete Davis became experts at finding ways to connect incompatible life forms through symbiotic relationships. But the real breakthrough came when children from different species began playing together in the integrated habitats. Young Gorthic, who had never seen living crystals, were fascinated by shimmering collective art forms. Nexus Network youth programs began including chorus meditation practices that help digital minds understand organic concepts like spirituality and wonder. The older generations were more resistant to change because they remembered centuries of war and death. Vorthek elders could not forget that core zealots had destroyed their factory worlds. Shimmering collective leaders still fear that Nexus Network expansion would consume their crystal homes. Each species carried scars from old wounds that made trust seem impossible. Human counselors like Dr. Susan Clark worked with trauma survivors from all 7 species to help them process their grief and anger without passing it on to their children. She developed therapy techniques that acknowledged the reality of past suffering while creating space for new possibilities. Most importantly, she helped alien leaders understand that healing did not mean forgetting, but rather choosing to build something better than what had been lost. The year deadline set by the ethereal conclave was approaching, and the galaxy watched nervously to see if the human experiment in Triangulum would succeed or fail. Some species had placed bets on when the integrated habitats would collapse into violence. Others were quietly preparing to copy human methods if they actually worked. Ben's team expanded to include hundreds of human specialists working on different aspects of the integration project. Psychologist Dr. Linda Moore helped species overcome cultural prejudices that had developed over centuries of conflict. Economist Dr. Frank Lee designed new trade systems that distributed resources fairly between very different types of societies. Environmental scientist Dr. Carol Green created ecosystem management plans that allowed multiple species to share the same worlds without destroying each other's habitats. The final test came when a natural disaster struck one of the integrated worlds, and all 7 species had to work together to survive. A massive solar flare disrupted power systems and communication networks, while triggering dangerous radiation storms that threatened to kill everyone on the planet. Each species had different strengths that were needed for survival, but they also had to overcome their instinctive distrust of their former enemies. Vorthic industrial equipment could build radiation shelters, but only if shimmering collective energy collectors provided power during the emergency. Nexus Network computers could coordinate rescue efforts, but only if core spiritual leaders helped calm panic among organic populations. The crisis lasted for 6 days, and when it was over, all 7 species had saved each other's lives multiple times. Warriors who had spent centuries trying to kill each other had worked side by side to protect civilians and restore essential services. The shared experience of facing death together had created bonds that were stronger than old hatreds. When the ethereal conclave arrived to judge the results of their tests, they found something that exceeded even their ancient wisdom. The Triangulum sector had not just achieved peace, but had become the most prosperous and innovative region in the galaxy. The first signs of the void-touched invasion came from the galaxy's edge, where entire star systems simply vanished from sensor readings overnight. Supreme Commander Grace Turner stood in the Emergency Command Center on New Terra watching holographic. Displays showed the scale of destruction that was approaching their galaxy. Her brother Ben had sent urgent reports from Triangulum about massive ships that seemed to consume everything they touched, including stars themselves. Grace had spent 20 years in Earth's military before joining the space program, and she had never seen anything like the enemy that was coming toward them. The Void Touch fleet was larger than all the military forces in the galaxy combined, and their technology was so advanced that conventional weapons seemed useless against them. Worse yet, they showed no interest in communication or negotiation, and appeared to have only one goal, which was the complete destruction of all life. The old Galactic Council had collapsed in panic when the first reports arrived. Each species immediately began preparing to defend only their own worlds, and several major powers started fighting each other over evacuation routes and refugee settlements. The Draconians wanted to make heroic last stands that would preserve their honor. The Hive Collective began converting their entire civilization into military production. The energy beings tried to hide in dimensions where physical matter could not follow them. Grace realized that the galaxy's only hope was to create the first, truly unified defense force in galactic history. She sent messages to every world and every species asking them to send their best military leaders and their most advanced weapons to join a combined fleet. The response was overwhelming as desperate governments realized that cooperation was their only chance for survival. The challenge was enormous because hundreds of different species had completely different ideas about military strategy and tactics. The Zephyrian harmonic warriors fought by singing their enemies to death with precise sound frequencies. The chromic heavy assault forces preferred to smash through enemy lines using brute force and thick armor. The Nereid stealth fleets attacked from underwater hiding places that did not exist in space battles. Grace developed something called the Harmony Protocol, which allowed each species to contribute their unique abilities while working toward common objectives. Instead of forcing everyone to fight the same way, she created specialized battle groups that combined different strengths into powerful combinations. Zephyrian harmonic weapons were amplified through Photari energy networks to create devastating sonic attacks. Chromic heavy cruisers carried Nereid stealth fighters in their cargo bays for surprise strikes. The key to making the system work was human tactical flexibility and emotional intelligence. Human commanders like Captain Dan Phillips could adapt their strategies in real time as battle conditions changed. More importantly, human psychology training helped keep the Alliance from falling apart under the stress of facing an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The first major battle took place at the Kepler Defense Line, where Grace had positioned the combined fleet to protect the galaxy's most important industrial worlds. The Void Touch attacked with ships that were the size of moons and weapons that could crack planets in half. Their technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic compared to anything the galaxy had ever seen. The battle lasted for 3 days, and the combined fleet lost 60% of its ships before discovering a weakness in the enemy formation. The Void Touch ships were incredibly powerful individually, but they did not coordinate their attacks or adapt to changing tactics. They fought like a swarm of unstoppable but mindless predators rather than an intelligent military force. Grace ordered her fleet to use guerrilla tactics instead of direct confrontation. Small mixed-species strike teams would hit Void Touched ships in retreat before the enemy could respond effectively. Zephyrian scouts would identify weak points in enemy armor. Chromic assault teams would punch through those weak spots. Photari energy manipulators would overload enemy power systems. Human coordinators would manage the timing so that all the attacks happened simultaneously. The new tactics worked better than anyone had hoped, and the combined fleet began winning battles against impossible odds. But Grace was troubled by reports from captured Void Touch technology that suggested these invaders were not evil conquerors, but desperate refugees from their own universe. Their dimension was dying, and they were trying to escape into the galaxy by consuming the life energy they found here. Dr. Helen Wright had been studying void-touch prisoners and technology samples brought back by the strike teams. She discovered that the invaders were actually multiple species working together just like the Galactic Defense Force. They had been forced to consume other forms of life to survive after their own universe began collapsing into nothingness. The invasion was not motivated by hatred or greed, but by the simple need to continue existing. Grace faced an impossible decision when she realized that the enemy fleet contained billions of civilians, including children who had never known any world except dying spaceships. Traditional military thinking said that she should destroy the invaders completely to protect the galaxy. But human moral thinking said that genocide was wrong even when fighting for survival. The decisive battle came at the galactic core where the void touch had gathered their entire remaining fleet around. The massive black hole that powered galactic civilization. They were trying to drain energy directly from the black hole to save their dying people, but the process would destroy every star system in the galaxy within a few years. Grace commanded a fleet of 10,000 ships from 50 different species. In the most complex military operation in galactic history, the battle plan required perfect coordination between groups that had been enemies for millions of years. Zephyr and Harmony singers had to synchronize their attacks with chromic heavy artillery, while Futari energy beings provided powerful weapons. Systems designed by completely different species. Captain Dan Phillips coordinated the space battle from his command ship Victory, while maintaining communication with ground forces on 12 different worlds and underwater teams on 3 ocean planets. His tactical display showed thousands of different colored dots, representing ships from dozens of species, all moving in patterns that would have been impossible without human coordination abilities. The breakthrough came when Grace realized that the Void Touch were not trying to destroy the galaxy, but were desperately trying to save their own people. Instead of ordering a final assault on the enemy fleet, she opened communication channels and offered something that no one in their dying universe had ever offered them before. The United Galaxy was willing to share space and resources with the refugees if they would stop consuming stars and learn to live peacefully with other species. The Void touched. Response was confusion and disbelief, because they had never encountered a civilization that was willing to help strangers who had been trying to kill them. Their own universe had been destroyed by endless wars between species that refused to cooperate even when facing extinction. They could not understand why the galaxy would offer friendship to enemies. Grace arranged for small groups of Void Touch refugees to visit the integrated habitats that humans had built in places like Triangulum. The refugees saw former enemies working together to create prosperity instead of destruction. They met children from different species playing together, and adults from incompatible civilizations building shared communities. The war ended not with a final battle, but with the largest refugee settlement operation in galactic history. The Void Touch brought knowledge and technology from their dead universe while learning new ways to survive without consuming other forms of life. Their desperate hunger for energy was satisfied by Futari feeding techniques that use renewable stellar radiation instead of draining stars to death. Integration was not easy because the Void Touched had spent centuries believing that survival required destroying competitors. Human counselors like Dr. Mary Johnson worked with refugee families to help them understand concepts like cooperation and mutual aid that had never existed in their previous universe. Void Touch engineers learned to build technologies that created resources instead of consuming them. The most important lesson came from Void Touch children who adapted to galactic society much faster than their parents. Young refugees who had grown up on dying spaceships were amazed by worlds full of life and beauty. They learned to play games that did not involve fighting and to solve problems through cooperation instead of conquest. Within 2 years, the former invaders had become productive members of galactic society. Their advanced technology helped improve life for everyone, while their bitter experiences with war made them powerful advocates for peaceful solutions to conflicts. The galaxy that had nearly been destroyed by the invasion emerged stronger and more united than ever before. President Elena Martinez stood at the massive window of her office on New Terra and watched ships from 300 different species coming and going from the orbital docks that surrounded the galaxy's new capital world. 5 years had passed since the end of the void-touched war, and the transformation of galactic civilization was more complete than anyone had dared to imagine. New Terra itself was a symbol of what cooperation could accomplish when different species worked together instead of fighting each other. The planet had been built from scratch using the combined technologies and knowledge of every member species in the unified Commonwealth. Zephyrian crystal cities grew alongside chromic stone fortresses, while Voltari energy gardens provided power for Nereid water parks where children from dozens of species played together under artificial suns. The old Galactic Council chambers had been replaced by the Parliament of Worlds, a magnificent building that could accommodate every possible form of life, from gas-based entities to digital consciousnesses. The architecture itself told the story of galactic unity, as each section was designed by different species working together to create something beautiful that no single civilization could have built alone. Elena had been elected as the first president of the unified Commonwealth in an election where beings who had never seen each other before voted together to choose their shared future. The campaign had been unlike anything in galactic history, as candidates from different species worked together on joint tickets and platforms that promised benefits for everyone rather than just their own people. Dr. Lisa Parker had become the director of interspecies medicine, and her revolutionary techniques for treating multiple species simultaneously had spread to hospitals throughout the galaxy. Medical schools on hundreds of worlds now taught courses in cross-species healing, using human empathy and adaptability as the foundation for understanding how to help anyone regardless of their biological nature. The integration academies that had started as small human training centers had grown into major universities, where young beings from every species learned to work together on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization. Students learned not just technical skills, but emotional intelligence and cultural sensitivity that allowed them to bridge differences that had once seemed impossible to overcome. Admiral Jake Sullivan commanded the Commonwealth Exploration Fleet from his flagship New Horizon and was preparing for humanity's next great adventure. The techniques that had united their own galaxy were now being applied to peaceful contact with neighboring galaxies where other civilizations were struggling with their own conflicts and divisions. The fleet that Jake was assembling included ships and crews from every member species of the Commonwealth. Each vessel was designed to showcase the benefits of cooperation by demonstrating technologies and social systems that no single species could have developed alone. The goal was not conquest or colonization, but to offer friendship and assistance to civilizations that might be ready to learn new ways of living together. Commander Roy Mitchell had been promoted to Director of Galactic Emergency Response in his joint rescue operations had saved millions of lives during natural disasters and industrial accidents across the galaxy. The principles he had developed for coordinating multi-species rescue efforts were now standard procedure for any crisis that required rapid response and resource sharing. The Commonwealth's greatest achievement was not military or technological but social. Cities throughout the galaxy now house multiple species working together in ways that turn their differences into advantages rather than sources of conflict. Zephyrian harmonic engineers collaborated with chromic structural specialists to build concert halls with perfect acoustics. Voltari energy artists worked with Nereid sculptors to create fountains of living light that danced through flowing water. Captain Sam Lewis had expanded his trading network into the Commonwealth Commercial Cooperative, a galaxy-spanning organization that made sure every world had access to the resources and products they needed regardless of their location or economic power. The cooperative operated on principles of mutual aid rather than pure profit, ensuring that wealthy systems helped support developing colonies and that no species was left behind during times of economic difficulty. The most remarkable change was in the children who were growing up in integrated communities where diversity was normal rather than strange. Young beings who had never known a galaxy divided by species barriers thought naturally in terms of cooperation and shared problem solving. They created art and music that combined elements from dozens of different cultures. They invented games that could be played by species with completely different physical abilities. These children were already beginning to solve problems that had puzzled their parents for generations. A group of teenage students from New Terra had recently proposed a solution to the energy shortage on the outer RIM worlds by combining void, touch-dimensional technology with Atari stellar feeding techniques and Zephyrian harmonic amplification. Their proposal was so innovative that the Commonwealth Science Council had approved it for immediate implementation. Elena's personal secretary was a young Hive Collective individual named Buzz 7, who had grown up in one of the first integrated habitats in Triangulum. Buzz 7 represented a new generation of aliens who thought of humans not as a separate species, but as natural coordinators and bridge builders who helped everyone work together more effectively. The Commonwealth had faced challenges during its first 5 years as member species learned to balance their own cultural identities with their responsibilities to the larger galactic community. Some groups had tried to withdraw from integration when they felt their traditional ways of life were being threatened. Others had pushed for faster changes that would have forced unwilling species to abandon practices that were important to them. Human mediators like Alex Thompson had developed new techniques for managing these tensions by helping species find ways to preserve what was most valuable from their cultures while adapting to life in a diverse galactic society. The key insight was that unity did not require uniformity and that the strongest communities were those that celebrated differences rather than trying to eliminate them. The Ethereal Conclave had kept their promise to share advanced technologies with the United Galaxy, but their greatest gift had been wisdom about managing civilizations that spanned multiple species. They had seen other galaxies attempt unity and fail because they tried to force conformity instead of fostering cooperation. The Ethereals serve as advisors and counselors, helping the Commonwealth avoid mistakes that had destroyed other multi-species civilizations. Research stations throughout the galaxy were working on projects that combined knowledge from hundreds of different species to solve problems that had seemed impossible when each civilization worked alone. Teams of scientists from incompatible species were developing new forms of faster-than-light travel, creating artificial worlds that could support any form of life, and even experimenting with ways to restore dead star systems to life. The arts had flourished in ways that no single species could have imagined. The Commonwealth Symphony Orchestra included musicians from 50 different species creating music that used sound, light, electromagnetic fields, chemical signals, and harmonic vibrations all at the same time. Audiences experienced concerts with all their senses in ways that transformed their understanding of what beauty could be. Sports leagues had been created for competitions between teams that included multiple species working together. The rules had to be constantly adjusted to account for the different physical abilities of various life forms, but that flexibility had led to games that were more creative and exciting than any single species sport had ever been. Elena often received messages from worlds throughout the galaxy, thanking humanity for teaching them that cooperation was possible. But she knew that humans had not really taught the other species anything they did not already know. Every species had the capacity for empathy and cooperation. Humans had simply shown them how to apply those qualities across species barriers, instead of just within their own groups. The galaxy that had once been divided by ancient hatreds and incompatible needs had become a community where differences were seen as opportunities rather than problems. Children grew up learning from teachers of multiple species. Workers collaborated on projects that benefited everyone. Artists created beauty that no single imagination could have conceived. As Elena prepared for the next session of the Parliament of Worlds, she reflected on how much had changed since that first day when she had sat in the old Galactic Council chambers, watching aliens argue while their galaxy faced destruction. The same species that had once refused to help each other were now working together to build a civilization that would have seemed like an impossible dream. Just a few years earlier, the United Galaxy was not perfect, and there were still conflicts and problems that needed to be solved. But now those challenges were met with the combined wisdom and resources of hundreds of different species working together.